Hi, my name is K.Thomas, W1DED. Today I have with me W8TAM, Thom Martin. Thom is one of the original founders of Parks on the Air. His name has come up a lot. I've heard Jason Johnson give him a lot of credit, and I've been really intrigued to learn more, as many of you know, about Parks on the Air, its inception, the execution, and where they are today. Thom, thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much, Kevin. I appreciate it.
So to start, tell us where you are. I believe you're in Michigan, is that right?
I am in Michigan. My background is showing a park that we visited in California. I can talk about that trip. It was kind of one of the once in a lifetime trips that I've taken.
Well, let's start there. We can get back into the origination of Parks in the Air later, but tell me about that trip.
Sure. So my wife Julie WTHA and I were both pretty active in Parks on the Air, and I've had I would say a long time goal of activating all of the state beaches in California. And my professional job, my day job, shuts down over the holidays, and so they give me some time off. I took some extra time off, and we drove to California, and we drove from a little bit north of Fort Bragg all the way to a little bit below Los Angeles, and activated beaches all along the way, and did that over the holidays, and right before the bad weather and I mean, even worse weather has struck California. So it's been really rough for California, and we were lucky to visit these parks when they were still open. Just a couple of them were closed by the time we had gotten to them, but um, a lot of my background images and kind of that was this last January, December and January. So a lot of my current pictures are from that trip.
Sounds like a fantastic trip. How many parks total were there?
Uh, we activated just over 100 parks in 21 days of travel.
That's a lot of setup and breakdown and QSOs.
I run a mobile. I run my POTA activations out of my mobile. I've got a Tahoe with a Scorpion screwdriver on the front of it, and so that really keeps the setup and breakdown pretty minimal. We can start calling CQ while we're in line waiting to get into the park, and kind of have a 10 activation, 10 contact activation for both of us. So we really 20 QSOs, um, done in a pretty short order.
So I was going to ask you that. So with the goal of hitting all these beaches, you weren't parking and getting 100 QSOs. You're getting the activation, moving on to the next one.
That's pretty much how we operate these days. It's pretty hit and run. Um, you know, there's lots of ways to measure your POTA success, and some people measure it in the number of kilos they have, and some people measure it in the number of park activations they have, and some people measure it in the number of QSOs. Or there's lots of different ways to slice it. And for us, it's unique parks. We really appreciate the unique experience of going to different parks.
Well, I do love that about Parks on the Air, and obviously you have some need to take some credit for this, but the fact that there's so much data involved, and whatever suits your fancy, whatever numbers you want to follow, and therefore kind of compare yourself potentially with other operators, you can do that. But speaking of activations, I see that you've activated, at least the last stats that I saw on the POTA page, 1,175 parks activated, 755 unique parks. That's amazing.
We've been interested in visiting parks and doing radio there all the way back to National Parks on the Air in 2016. So we did several activations of National Parks on the Air, and when that ended, we started doing POTA. And POTA was a little bit different back then. I was involved in the WWFF program, and so there was a little bit different rules. There was still the U.S. based POTA though, and it was 10 QSOs, and so we participated in that. And you know, I'm kind of this is kind of the beginning of when POTA took off. Jason thought maybe he was going to shut the program down, and it was something that WTAJ and I love to do, and I wanted to see it continue. And I volunteered to help him set up some technology to do this, and we really thought it was going to be a small thing. We planned for maybe 100 people would be interested in what we were doing.
And tens of thousands of people later, here we are.
Yeah, we built the technology with the idea that it might need to scale, and that is in pretty good parallel to what I do for a living. So we set ourselves up in the cloud and started building a database and 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 the ability to ingest QSOs through ADIF into that.
Well, Tom, before we get too far, I'd like to understand the timing a little bit more. So, around when did Parks on the Air kind of come on the scene, and how soon did you get involved with Jason?
Jason had the Parks on the Air name um, back in 2017. So I started in March of 2017 after Napota. When it kind of became its own program, that was in early 2018, like end of 2017, early 2018.
So, it's interesting to me, and probably not that surprising to people, that both Jason Johnson, W3AAX, as well as yourself, have very strong software IT backgrounds. And I think that's where we really get the benefit of that, because you've built a system that can scale and that is intuitive for people like myself to use. So thank you for that. But tell me a little bit more about those conversations between two software types in making that sort of a commitment early on, when you only thought it was going to be 100 and it became literally tens of thousands.
There was actually a Michigan State Parks on the Air program, and it was a partnership between the Michigan Department of Natural Resources and ham radio operators. And Will, who's now a silent key, W8WDR, was a DNR employee and also a ham. And he contacted Julie and I as a result of working us at a Napota activation. And had posted some photos, and he had identified that we were more young than some of the people who he knew in ham radio. And he asked if he could use our pictures to promote this Michigan State Parks on the Air program within Michigan, the Michigan DNR. And we said, yes, that's fine. And he built this program. And I mean, basically, we felt like he asked us to go to all of the state parks and activate radio. And the day that the program started was really our first POTA activation, not a no POTA activation. And we had a tremendous pileup, and it was just as much fun as Napota, except we didn't have to drive so far to a national park. And back then, it was just the state parks and the recreation areas. We didn't even have trails or the wildlife management areas. So it was tremendous. We did 7 parks in 7 days. It was this crazy whirlwind start to activation. It took a lot longer to get an activation. And this in 2017, um, bottom of the solar cycle, or real close to the bottom of the solar cycle. So we were putting up this enormous wire antenna trying to get our 100-watt signal, out. Um, it took a lot more time of setup and teardown. Between the two of us, we could still get it done in about 7 minutes, but it there was a lot of work to get to the point where we could do it in 7 minutes.
Well, 7 minutes is pretty amazing. I just did an activation yesterday at Kilo 2383 Bradbury Mountain, and I make it hard on myself. It's winter here in Maine. I brought a portable ice shack. I had a DX Commander Expedition. Took me an hour to set up, but I've been trying to get better at this, because the Expedition gives me a quicker access to more bands. Whereas before I was setting up for 20, I'd have to break it down, set up for 40. And I know someone's going to be listening to this and say, why didn't you just put up a wire? But, I'm not going to go there right now. But before we go too far, I don't know what DNR means. What does that acronym mean?
Oh, the Department of Natural Resources. So it's the Michigan version of kind of a conservation organization. They're the ones that control all of the state parks, all of the wilderness areas, all of the state level public lands. They control the fishing and hunting licenses, all of that.
I'm picturing you and Julie out in a field with your setup, your 100 watts, screaming out into the world, nobody answering you at the bottom of the solar cycle. How did the program take off? How did it take off? Was there just word of mouth? How did people start kind of getting involved with Parks on the Air and realizing, hey, this could be a lot of fun for me also?
So we built some of the infrastructure. We had it so that you could email your logs in. We had volunteers that were managing the logs and uploading them into the system. And we had a nice Facebook group, lots of people participating, kind of the core group. Plus, we had people coming in, and it was growing pretty fast. By any metric, it was growing pretty fast. Just by, I think, advertising on CQ POTA on a band. When the band is dead and there's one guy calling CQ POTA, you know, anyone that rolls through the band is going to hear that and say, "Well, what is POTA?" And I've described POTA 1,000 times to people on the air, and now it's a little ubiquitous. Like, it's rare to come across someone who just has no idea, has never heard a POTA station. Maybe they haven't turned their radio on in a few years, but um, back then there were dedicated hunters. Like, they would wait. I mean, just talking way back in the day, we would be the only people on the spotter. Or there'd be Brian K0ATZ. He was another activator that was frequently on the spotter in those early days, and he was working all of the parks in Missouri. And you know, they would wait. We would say, all right, we're QRT. We're probably an hour and a half away from the next park, and they would wait and to hear us. And then in an hour and a half, they'd say, "Has anyone heard them? You think they're okay?" Like, "Oh no, it took us an hour and 45 minutes, or we stopped for McDonald's or whatever." And and then at like an hour 50 or hour 6, 2 hours, they're starting to, form a search party to send out to find out what happened to us. It was a little bit different environment then. Um, the the growth of it, really, it took off immediately. And we added people. And unfortunately, one of the things that we missed early on, and we still don't do this, is capture what date or what time someone signs up for POTA. So, but you can see the in the data of QSOs how not only the solar cycle, right, and the radio is better and more bands are available to us, but also just the number of people performing POTA and hunting and chasing and activating.
Well, I've got to say, Tom, I was the guy that you were describing 1 year ago. I was licensed back in the late 70s. I let my license lapse, got relicensed in March of last year, 2022, and turned the radio on, and I had no clue what CQ POTA was. I was hearing people on the frequency, and I'd respond to them, diligently make a note of their park number. And this happened probably a dozen times. Like, I have no idea what's going on. I felt like I'd been living under a rock for all this time. So then I started investigating. And for me, it was so much fun because I didn't really have the opportunity, and still don't, to have a proper setup at my home QTH. And that freedom of being able to just operate portably from wherever, and have a community of ham radio operators who wanted to contact me, it was very liberating. And I still want to get a better home QTH setup that I'm working on. But it's even yesterday, it was so really fantastic to be able to get in the car, go out to a park, spend a couple hours, forget about all the other worries of the world and my day job, and make my 150 contacts, reconnect with a bunch of friends. So yeah, it was an interesting experience a year ago, not to know anything about it at all.
Well, I'm so glad that you found us. It really took off during the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic. You can see the March 2020 bump in POTA, where people needed to socially isolate and socially distance, and going out to a park and setting up a radio. You can still maintain a social connection to your friends on the radio, but there's no risk to your health or their health. And I think that, I mean, the terrible results of the pandemic, but as far as for POTA, it was a boon for us. We've gone from insane growth to hyper growth. It I don't even know what the numbers are right now, but it's probably north of 35,000 people signed up for POTA. And that just, I can't even imagine that. you know, we 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 thought back in the day. I mean, there was once a time where we had a serious discussion in the admin channel about whether we needed a spotter or not, or we could just use the DX cluster. You know, things that we take for granted today are early decisions that we made that worked out well.
Well, you mentioned when you got started how you would be the only person on the spotting page. And it just made me recall yesterday when I was out at the activation, I narrowed the spotter down to, I think, a 20-meter single sideband, and there had to be 24 people just there. So I can't even imagine how many people were on the spotter overall. But when you talk about the growth of parks on the air, you really have to also talk about the worldwide growth, the fact that Jason and the team are adding so many parks worldwide, and those countries are being activated. It seems every day. It's really pretty amazing to me that when I do turn the spotter on, I always see someone that is not in the U.S. or Canada, which is really fun.
Yeah. The when we added Japan, that activity exploded. The Japanese love POTA, and we just added China, and I've seen some Chinese parks on the air on the spotter, and that's amazing. I have a reasonable setup here at my home to QTH. It's a wire antenna and 100 watts. So I can only hear so much. I live in the city of Ann Arbor, so there's a decent amount of noise, and I can't hear the DX stations. But I go out to a park, and frequently I can find a spot where there's very low noise, and that's one of the joys for me. I mean, I think everyone says that it's so much more of a joy to operate a park in a low noise or operate a radio in a low noise environment you know than our houses with all of our electronics and our neighbors' electronics and everything else.
Tom, one of the things that I consistently am amazed at is the volunteer structure within Parks on the Air. Particularly in a year where the ARRL has said volunteerism is their topic for the year. But then you look at
Yeah.
Parks on the Air, and there just doesn't seem to be a problem attracting the volunteers to make this program work. But then within that group of volunteers, I think the unsung heroes are the developers. And we've already touched upon this, but the fact that this program is so enjoyable for so many, including me, is the infrastructure that's been built. So talk to me about that group of volunteers, the developers. I presume you're still involved, and how many other people are involved on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I am still involved. I'm actually the team lead now for development. So I kind of speak to Jason about what's happening in development, and I try to wrangle all the developers to keep on top, on topic and in a good direction. I mean, they're fantastic anyway. Um, Jeremy N0AW and Colby Whiskey Romeo 5, or no, Whiskey Bravo Whiskey Bravo 5 Romeo, I think is his call. I I don't work him on the air. He just put up new antennas though. I'm looking forward to that. Um, there's about 15 people now, and we've had a big influx. I think the ARL and some of the live streams that Jason has been doing, I think, has brought some more developer volunteers. So there's quite a few younger in the program developers who've come on recently. Um, we have some big plans. It's a big application that we manage, and I think some people have the impression that it's a simple thing, but I promise you that it is not, and it has scaled successfully with very little downtime, and I'm very proud of that. We've done such an amazing job, and the developers, I couldn't ask for a better group of people to work with.
What is on the horizon, Tom, for new changes to Parks on the Air?
Well, kind of some boring technical stuff that is holding us back at this point. We use a framework for the public face of POTA called Victor Uniform Echo, and they've had a major revision, and we're now a major revision behind. And so there's some stuff, including internationalization, some more WebSockets where there's real time push data about your statistics or your spots. Um, at this point, the spotter is the largest bulk of the data that we serve, and it's still a pretty heavy page to load with very little cell service. Um, with WebSockets, we can do better. So there's a big push to upgrade the kind of the back end software, which is really the front end software, but it's not software on your computer, it's software on our computers. We use a technology in AWS called Lambda, and the idea behind that is there's no one computer that runs POTA. As people request web pages from POTA, new computers are spun up and they last for about 5 minutes and then they go away. So it's all virtualized and it will scale to demand. And the actual cost of that is ludicrously inexpensive. Now, there's additional costs for that database and like the steady state data that we store on the back end, but it's a very scalable setup that we have for POTA. We've done an exceptional job of engineering it.
Now, after you deal with the view revision and keeping up with what you call all the boring things, but I'm sure it's going to be pretty impressive to us, what are the types of things that you'd like to see the team attack over the next 12 to 18 months?
Well, we're at this point we're pushing awards, like awards that people have earned that we don't yet have artwork for and have not put into the system. So that's a big thing that we're working on. We're also working on a public API, a documented public API. And the idea behind that is more POTA integration in software packages that are completely third party to us. And there is a on our Discord, our POTA Discord, there's a channel about public API, and anyone who's interested in talking about that, it is being implemented right now. So some stuff works, it's not finished by any stretch of the imagination, but that's also a part of the kind of the rewrite of the front end. Also, it'll depend on that. Uh, we're calling it 1.0 because the first API that we had was kind of version zero, you know,
So that was point 0.5. Now we're moving on to 1.0.
Exactly. Yeah, we're planning this API to be version 1.0, and that's going to be big. It just kind of what I see coming is, oh, you go to a park, you log your application, you press the upload this to my POTA account, and it just uploads. You don't have to deal with files and naming and any of that stuff.
I love it. I'll look forward to seeing all of that. So beyond
It's going to be cool.
beyond development, which is your niche, what changes would you like to see with Parks on the Air, or forget about changes? How would you like to see Parks on the Air evolve over the next couple years?
Yeah, that's a really good question and kind of a difficult one to answer. I feel like we're on a roller coaster, and I don't think that we're to the top of the big drop yet. I don't know. It's already exceeded my expectations so dramatically that I can't even guess what's going to happen next. We keep doing what we're doing, right? We keep the services up and make sure that the spotter is full of people, and the solar cycle is producing such great activity across the bands. It's really a joy to watch it happen.
Well, I'm going to enjoy watching it happen as well as participating in it over the next couple of years. Tom, I really appreciate the time that you have taken to spend with me today.
I appreciate you inviting me.
I've been talking to Thom Martin, W8TAM. He's responsible for a lot of what we see and enjoy on the Parks on the Air page every day and in the program. Really appreciate you, Tom. Thank you very much for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Kevin.